Nau mai, haere mai, kia ora, and welcome along to Shine Today. Nā mihi nui ki a koe to Andrew Urquhart tēnei. A pleasure to have your company, and also a great pleasure to welcome to the program Manuel Beazley. He is Vicar for Māori to the Auckland or Te Tai Tokoro Diocese for the Catholic Church in Aotearoa. Kia ora, tēnā koe. Thank you for joining us.
Tēnā koe.
Before we go any further, could you tell us where you're from? What is your pipiha? Where's home for you?
On my grandmother's side, I whakapapa back to a little settlement called Motu Kraka, and the hapu there is Ngai Tūpoto, and the iwi is Te Rarawa. And on my grandfather's side, another little settlement on the southern banks of the Hokianga, a little place called Omanaya. And so that's the Beazley side. And Ngāti Hau, Ngāti Kaharau are the hapu, and Ngāpuhi is the iwi.
So for you, did you grow up in the Hokianga? Was that home for you?
No, I was born and bred in Auckland, but with my whānau having connections to those areas, we went home quite a lot as I was growing up, but was born in Auckland and raised in Auckland.
So that sort of urban Maori upbringing, but still very much with roots to your marae? Yeah,
so my mother was perhaps the first of my whānau, and her generation were the first of my whānau that were brought up in an urban setting. So during the 1960s, where there was a great sort of migration of Māori to urban centres, my mum was the first generation, if you like, of those urban-raised Māori, and then subsequently myself and my siblings as well. So we are now probably about going into the fourth generation of my whānau that are more urban rather than having the upbringing in our ancestral lands.
Does that affect cultural identity, or did it for you, in terms of your understanding of what it meant to be Māori?
It possibly meant that we had to make a conscious decision to pursue that part of our identity. Growing up in the city, we always knew we were Māori, but we had to make a conscious decision to connect back to our wāhi tupuna, the ancestral lands.
Where does that sit in terms of the, I suppose, the identification with faith? Is it Māori Christian or Christian Māori for you?
Yeah, that's a good question, and invariably that comes up in Māori circles. Am I a Māori Catholic or am I a Catholic Māori? And invariably the two elements are interchange, as it were. But I recall in the message of Pope John Paul II, when he visited Aotearoa in the 80s, said to us as Māori that it is as Māori as the Lord calls us, and therefore it is as Māori that we belong to the Church, the body of Christ. So based on that enlightenment from St. John Paul II, I would say that being Māori is a unique part of who I am as a Christian, as a Catholic, and so therefore I come to the Lord firstly as Māori.
So called into ministry as Māori. You've been in ministry now, 20 years or so. Tell us about that journey. How did you become involved with ministry?
Yeah, like many of us who are involved in ministry, it wasn't a straight line sort of journey. It's taken many paths in those 20 years. My call to ministry with Māori has really only intensified in the last 3 or 4 years. Ministry in the church for me has taken many shapes. Initially, I was engaged by the church to work with young people, and in doing so, I connected with young people from the Tai Tokiro, so there was always that connection there. And then I was appointed as the pastoral assistant to a parish in Otara in South Auckland, and that has a very large Māori population there, so there was that connection to the Māori faith community there. But overall, ministry for me was very multicultural in those days, and it was in 2020, just prior to the pandemic, that our Bishop, Patrick Dunn, invited me to take on the role as his vicar for Māori, for the Diocese of Auckland and the Tai Tokiro.
Now that's a big jump, isn't it, from a local parish priest in Otara to the vicar for all of Te Tai Tokoro. A bit of an adjustment there from local ministry to a broader scale?
Yeah, and one of the big adjustments, if you like, that I had to undertake was in my thinking anyway. Being part of a parish, you are afforded the time and the opportunities to create relationships. And now in the role as Vicar for Māori, there are 23 Māori Catholic communities in our diocese, and I need to be available for each of them and to spread myself around to each of them.
That's one for every hour of the day and 1 hour to rest, right?
Yeah. And so you don't get the opportunities as I did in the past to be able to form those relationships. They are forming, but they're different.
In terms of this is something in some ways that you've inherited, a Māori pastoral care plan. Tell us about that and the vision that you want to see implemented from there.
Yeah, so in the Catholic Church, we have a Māori pastoral care plan that has been championed by many people over the last 40 years. And essentially, it's a plan that has several action points to ensure and to encourage Māori participation in the life of the church. And as you can imagine, from something that was written 40 years ago, we need to review that, and we need to renew that and ask ourselves, is it fit for purpose in a 21st century church?
Is the strategy working, do you think, or do adjustments need to be made?
I think with everything that we need to look at it honestly and reflect about where we've come from and where we're going, and there will need to be some changes made. One of the big elements of that is leadership, and in our Māori Catholic communities we have the leaders that are coming through, and in time we'll be able to reap the benefits.
One of the challenges, I suppose, if it's by Māori for Māori, are there the Māori clergy to be able to service the need in that community?
Not within the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church still has a long way to go to establish a Māori priesthood, as it were. We look to our brothers, the Te Hāhi Mihingaru, the Anglican Church, who have a very established Māori clergy. We don't necessarily have that in the Catholic Church. The reasons for that are varied, but we do have a ministry role in the church, which we call catechists, and they are lay led ministries within our Māori communities that lead services, officiate at funerals and other types of worship gatherings. And the great gift of that ministry role is that it's open to men and women, whereas traditionally the Catholic priesthood is a male only ministry. So the role of the catechists includes women as well, and it also is connected to the whānau, to the hapu, to the iwi, whereas with the traditional structure of the priesthood, a priest can be positioned or sent to places outside of his own area, whereas katakita usually will serve their home families and communities.
A quote from you here, it's dangerous when you say things out loud, people write them down, right? I will serve wherever there is a need, and there certainly is a need amongst Māori people. What do you see to be the key spiritual needs for Māori in Aotearoa?
Really, for me, it's about Māori being able to reconnect to their sense of atuatanga. And by that I mean their sense that we are from God, and each person has a tapu, has a sense of sacredness and also a dignity, a power, an authority within them. And it's recovering that sense of atuatanga within Māori. It's there, but it needs to be encouraged and affirmed so that Māori can, as in the words of Pope John Paul II, be Māori within the structures of the church.
Now, you took on this new role just before COVID hit, as you said. I mean, it's been a challenging couple of years for all of us, but to what extent have you been able to achieve some of the things you wanted to, given the restrictions and complications that COVID brought? One of the
sort of core principles in Māoritanga or Te Ao Māori is what we say, kanohi ki te kanohi, face to face. Yes. And with COVID and the associated lockdowns coming in, that face to face element was not able to happen. And so in that regard, some of the things that I set out to achieve pre-pandemic had to be set aside for the time because there were other things that needed a response. For Māori, the real issues stemming were around family well-being, physically, emotionally, spiritually, all of those things. And so it was really responding to various needs that were coming up ad hoc.
A tough time for all of us, particularly for Māori in isolated communities and households.
Yeah, it was. And so the Catholic Church sent support by way of food and finances for communities to be able to support themselves during the time. And as we've emerged from COVID, some of the things that were put in place are now continuing, which is good.
Jesus, of course, said to his disciples, go into the uttermost parts of the earth and preach the gospel. I think he was talking about Aotearoa there. Many years on, are there Māori in New Zealand that have never heard of Jesus? Is there work to be done even at that basic level, or is it just that a relationship needs to develop, do you think?
I think with the presence of the early missionaries that came to Aotearoa and the early converts to Christianity, certainly the person of Jesus is known. What I'm seeing at the moment is now that person we need to develop that relationship, that love, to be able to fall in love with Jesus. Jesus is certainly known, but how Jesus fits into the lives of individual believers is something that needs to be developed.
And the place of Jesus within Te Ao Māori, within a Māori worldview as well, again, work to be done there?
Absolutely. I mean, we are within the structures of Te Ao Māori and Māori communities. There's this lovely concept of te mātāmua, the firstborn, and Jesus is the firstborn, te mātāmua, of the human family, as it were. And so, in that regard, there's a basis or a foundation to create that relationship with Jesus as the mātāmua.
When it comes to, I suppose, connecting with Māori at community levels, in some ways it's an easier connection in the Hokianga where your people are from. You know, there's the marae and there's a church building associated with that. Is there a bit of a disconnect for urban Māori that even if they have a marae, there's not necessarily a church or Christian spirituality associated with that marae? Sure.
I mean, it's sort of right across all spheres of life, and of course religion is one of them, where Māori, as a result of the urban drift and migration, suffered disconnections of many varieties, and we were very fortunate in that process in the 60s and 70s that we had great leaders of our people, notably Dame Whenua, who for us in the urban parts of Auckland was the great force and the driver behind Te Unga Waka Marae, which is a Catholic Māori centre in Epsom in Auckland, with the idea of uniting Māori who had come from all parts of the country, not just the north or the Taitokero or the Hokianga, but from all parts of Aotearoa, making Auckland their place of dwelling, and just connecting them firstly to each other, and then strengthening that connections with Atua, with God.
Are there generational obstacles as well in terms of the development of Māori spirituality or discipleship within a church catechism? Is it perhaps that the elders have failed to pass on what they were taught on the marae?
Yeah, there's certainly a generational thing going on there where, as I said to you, and I mentioned Dame Whenua, and there was that tier of leaders and that generation of people who were very, very committed to the work and to the mission of the Catholic Church, and then their children came through, and then now we're into their grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and we are seeing that the engagement, the connection, the participation of this current generation is very, very much diminished. And the reasons for that are wide and varied, I would say. But I would also say that that's something that probably for the Catholic Church anyway, stems across all cultures
Yes.
and all nationalities.
And that was your background in youth work within the Catholic Church. Challenges, but also opportunities for rangatahi moving forward, do you think?
Great opportunities. As I come back to my point about being able to develop this relationship with Jesus, allowing and facilitating ways in which our people can fall in love with the person of Jesus, because in my experience, Māori have never lost their sense of atuatanga,
Yeah.
the sense that the sacredness, the tapu within everything, that's still very strong in Māori communities, regardless of religious belief or religious adherence. So that's there. Now, from a Christian point of view, is to be able to develop this falling in love with Jesus,
Yeah.
and presenting Jesus as someone who loves them and who's someone who will journey with them.
There's lots of challenges there, but there's also, I'm sure, lots of success stories about how you have seen God break through into people's lives. In the way that you measure that, how would you even define success in that way?
Well, it's very much the individual stories, invariably travelling around this diocese of ours. Some people ask me, they say to me, what does the Vicar for Māori do? And I often reply, well, he's a professional cup of tea drinker. Because invariably you go and you meet with someone and they'll say, would you like a cup of tea? And of course I'd say yes.
Yeah.
And it's in those cup of teas, the chats that happen over those cups of teas, I can really get a sense of God working in the lives of individuals and in their families. And that's, for me, where it's at. If we can build strong faith within families, if we can build strong parents, we'll build stronger communities and we'll build a stronger nation.
And over those cups of tea, you find out what people's hopes are for their own whānau, and perhaps the burdens that they have on their heart, what they're praying for their family.
Absolutely. And invariably, it really comes down, basically, I want my children, my family, to have the best. And for Māori that I'm interacting with, they see a faith life as being part of that best life that they're wanting for their families.
New Zealand, at least in theory, a bicultural nation, and whilst your work is specifically with Māori, what can non-Māori, perhaps watching this program as well, what can they contribute? What value can they add to the ministry and to the conversation?
Yeah. See, I think the term bicultural and biculturalism perhaps doesn't help us too much.
Okay.
Because invariably, when people hear the term bicultural, they think immediately Māori and Pākehā, Māori and European.
Yep.
And so if I'm of another ethnic background, it means nothing to me. I have no part in this at all.
Yep.
And if we base our bicultural relationship on Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the bicultural relationship that Te Tiriti espouses is the two cultures are the Crown and Māori, but not Māori as an ethnic people, Māori as a sovereign entity, as it were. That's the initial bicultural relationship. Now, in 1840, it just so happened that everyone on the Māori side of the Māori sovereign state, as it were ethnically Māori, and everyone on the Crown side of the Te Tiriti was ethnically British. Now, in 2022, we still have that bicultural relationship with Māori and the Crown, and then Māori are still, for the most part, ethnically Māori, but the Crown, the face of the Crown, is now ethnically diverse.
Yes.
And so that's where I think we've got to get to a point where anyone who's here in Aotearoa can see themselves as a treaty partner, as it were. So what's my relationship with Māori? What does that look like as a person with Filipino heritage or Indian heritage? What does that look like, my relationship with Māori? And then, of course, our agencies, such as the church and our organisations, we need to examine that as a collective response too.
Because the church had a significant role in back in 1840 with the treaty. Does it still have a role today in terms of treaty relationships, do you think?
And that would always be my call to my church, to the Catholic Church in particular, because of the presence of Bishop Pompelia, our first bishop, at the hui in Waitangi. we have a special relationship to Te Tiriti o Waitangi, which we need to honour and uphold. But I also say to our church, to the Catholic Church, is that whilst Te Tiriti o Waitangi formalised the relationship, as it were, the church had a relationship with Māori predating Te Tiriti. And that's the foundation. And that's in and through the person of Bishop Pompelia, our first bishop, who ministered in and amongst the people of the Hokianga and of the Bay of Islands in his early years. And so we do have a special relationship to Te Tiriti, which then imposes a special responsibility, as it were.
Some would have the viewpoint that, to an extent, the treaty has failed Māori, and by implication, perhaps the church has failed Māori as well. What would your response be to that, Manuel?
Yeah, look, I think the signatories of Te Tiriti o Waitangi signed it because they saw something in it for them. Everyone who signed it, because there were many Māori, many rangatira, who simply didn't want to sign, but they did, because they felt that if they didn't, they'd miss the bus, as it were. So they signed it, understanding that somewhere down the track there was going to be something in it for them. The Crown did the same. They entered into this because there was something in it for them. I think in 2022, if we can capture that sense of something in it for us, that sense of Te Tiriti providing an endless opportunities, I think that's where we need to get to. Because we can talk forever about the failures, and a lot of them have been well publicised and documented, and there've been many small failures which have gone through the passing of time. But until we can all come to this understanding that there is something in it for all of us, we won't move forward. We are 18 years away from 2040.
Yes.
So the bicentenary of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, and what really have we achieved in 200 years?
Do you think the church has the opportunity to speak into civil society outside of church life, to perhaps show a way of partnership and reconciliation, even, as you say, nearly 200 years on from the events of 1840?
And again, coming back to the comment I made about the Catholic Church's special relationship to Te Tiriti o Waitangi, we not only have the I suppose, duty to do so, to be able to speak to all of Aotearoa, but we've also got it within ourselves as a church to be able to look to who we are as the church and to be able to provide that way forward.
Now, coming up, the Ngā Tapuai Hikoi, this is something that you're involved with, another challenge and opportunity. Tell us about
Yeah, I mean, so every year we commemorate the first Mass, the first Catholic service on Aotearoa soil, which happened on the 13th of January in 1838 at the home of one of the very prominent Catholic families, the Poynton family in the Hokianga. And they they were petitioning Rome to send a priest to Aotearoa, and that was answered in the person of Bishop Pompelia, a Frenchman who left Lyon in 1836 and finally arrived here in January 1838. And so the Ngā Tapuai pilgrimage is an opportunity for us to celebrate our beginnings as the Catholic Church in Aotearoa, but also to open up the Taitokero, and in particular the Hokianga, to people who might not otherwise make this journey, and just opening up the history, both Maori history and also Catholic history in the area. So it's a 3 or 4 day pilgrimage that people are invited to undertake, leading towards the celebration of the commemorative Mass.
So, I mean, a wonderful legacy in that regard, and hey, something very exciting to be involved with. Maybe I should consider taking up the hikoi because I've got a Pompelia haircut.
Yeah,
that kind of helps. But I mean, that's the history, and lots of challenges in the role that you have taken up, lots of opportunities within that. Do you have hope for transformation within your community?
Oh yeah, I mean, look, I wouldn't have taken on the role if I didn't firstly see that there was something to be gained by it, both for myself personally, but also for ourselves as a church, but also to be able to see that, coming back to Pope John Paul's statement, that we as Māori can actively be involved in the church, the body of Christ, as Māori, without having to sacrifice, without having to compromise who we are in order to be something else, that we can be both and, as it were, that we can be, we have the saying, tūturu Māori, tūturu Catholic, Katorika. Tūturu Māori, tūturu Katorika. Truly Māori, truly Catholic.
Yeah. Well, we certainly appreciate your time and your ministry. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Ngā mihi ki a koe.